Blockbusters. They're not just a chain of defunct video rental stores. That Cinema Haven's namesake comes from a category of movies we've all heard of. But what is a blockbuster? It may conjure images in your head of bombastic spectacle, sweaty stars saving the town or world, and big box office numbers. But why do we call it that? A blockbuster? And what components go into making a blockbuster so bombastic? Hollywood hasn't always had blockbusters. For a long time, they were basically just hits and flops, movies that turned a profit or didn't. Blockbusters, meanwhile, are usually mega hits. Let's be clear, funding a movie is risky. Studios sink millions of dollars into projects that may not be released until years later. It's tough to predict where the public consciousness will be by that time, much less what the product of all of those dollars will come out like. So let's take a look at the history of blockbusters and find out why the blockbuster era has been such a long one. Join me in the cinema circle. There are a few different tales of the origin of the term blockbuster that are, well, inaccurate. Some have tried to tie it to the practice of block booking, wherein a studio would sell a group of films to a theater. So instead of just getting a studio's biggest hit they wanted to show, independent theaters would be forced to also buy the rights to whatever other B picture the studio needed to make money on. Or maybe they'd sell a block of middling films, so the profits would be spread out. This practice was outlawed in 1948 as part of the landmark United States versus Paramount Pictures. That's a story for another time. So then a blockbuster would have been a movie that busted this block system, right? One that was so successful it sold out on its own and didn't need to be packaged with others. That would seem to check out, but the timeline of the phrase's popularity doesn't quite line up. Others point to movies that had lines around the block, but there also just isn't any evidence of that being linked to the term. Sure, you can find stories of people lining up to watch Gone with the Wind or even Psycho, but no one was ever calling those movies blockbusters in their day, though maybe we'd retroactively give them that distinction. Instead, the term blockbuster starts, as with so many things, during World War II. It came first to be used to describe a bomb that could bust the block, like an entire city block. And people knew about these bombs, just like they knew about so many absolutely horrendous things during World War II. I mean, what a terrible, terrible time for so many. Publicists played on that familiarity to convey the impact of a movie to audiences. And it worked. But the term didn't come into full usage until the start of the blockbuster era. The blockbuster era began with the very first blockbuster, Steven Spielberg's 1975 summer thriller, Jaws. To understand the new ground broken by Jaws, we first have to back up a little bit and look at what came before. The golden age of Hollywood was dominated by the studio system. Studios originally controlled all aspects of production and distribution. Most studios worked within some sort of their own niche, but all wanted to make movies that could be marketed to as many people as possible. Studios also owned the theaters, part of what was broken up in that Supreme Court case in 1948. Monopolies. As the studio system began to dissolve over the following decades, a new era of Hollywood, fittingly deemed New Hollywood, commenced, dominated by independent creators studios would have found objectionable. This period is also worthy of study in its own right, and we'll probably do that on this channel, but it's also important to give context to what comes next. But suffice it to say for now that movies like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Midnight Cowboy had content that would have been barred under the previous self-imposed censorship of the Hays Code. Still, these movies made big money and showed that Hollywood was ready to shift with the culture. Jaws was a massive undertaking in terms of scale and cost that paid off 50-fold, making $472 million on a $9 million budget. For comparison, the mega hit The Godfather made $287 million on a $7 million budget. Jaws was not just a juggernaut in terms of its financial success. It laid a blueprint for summer entertainment for decades to come. Star Wars compounded on the movement, cementing the template for big budget, big box office events the studios were excited to make. Time is a flat circle, and the industry had circled back around to studio practices of making entertainment that was marketable to the most people. Films like Jaws and Star Wars had appealed to the so-called four quadrants, to men and women under and over 25. So that's the history a little bit, but what makes a blockbuster a blockbuster? When you hear that phrase, certain images probably come to mind. I think of, big spectacle movies from my childhood that were not essential viewing, but were a nice way to cool off and have some thrilling fun. Most blockbusters do have a massive budget and scale. Jurassic Park brought dinosaurs to life. Indiana Jones explored exotic locations and massive set pieces. The Mission Impossible films are a series of extreme stunts tied together by a thread, and I love them for that. Many blockbusters have also spawned entire franchises. Ghostbusters, Die Hard, Star Wars, and the entirety of the MCU have all gone on to garner multiple sequels, some of which have outperformed the original in terms of commercial and critical reception. In fact, most movies you go to see are based on an existing property, by a substantial margin. Don't get me wrong, this has always been a factor in Hollywood. It's not like we've run out of stories to tell. Some of the earliest films were based on plays and novels. However, this trend is especially noticeable in blockbuster filmmaking, where filmmakers play on your familiarity to get you to buy those tickets. Think of it this way. Are you more likely to buy a ticket to see a movie about a vampire named Carl or one named Dracula? For all intents and purposes, they could very well be the same movie, but you're much more likely to want to see Dracula because you know Dracula. He's your pal. So perhaps a common theme in blockbusters is familiarity. We hardly ever go into a blockbuster not knowing what to expect. You may not know exactly what's going to happen, obviously. It's like seeing a Pixar movie. Blockbusters in their own right. When you go to see a Pixar movie, you know that you'll probably laugh. They're going to try to make you cry. And it's going to have the Pixar vibe. You know the vibe, the Pixar vibe. The sense of knowing what you'll get is key to the success of a blockbuster. Most of them are genre films, action, adventure, sci-fi, which set an expectation of tone from the onset. Many also feature stars with established personas. It plays again into your expectations. You have an expectation of what a Tom Cruise movie will be, for example. You know if you go into a Mission Impossible movie or is he Jack Reacher? Go into a Jack Reacher movie. You know what you're gonna get. But if he starts a brand new franchise where he's playing Jackie Jumper, for instance. Oh, Tom Cruise is Jackie Jumper? Yeah, I'll go see that. Why not? Jackie Jumper. While there are blockbuster comedies and dramas, most films categorized and described this way are thrill machines meant to dazzle and entertain. Even Titanic, a blockbuster by every standard, is half a costume drama, half a disaster movie focused on the spectacle of the sinking ship. In the past, blockbusters were appealing because they were turn-off-your-brain fun. Indiana Jones movies are clear good guy versus bad guy romps that you can lose yourself in. You can have the thrills of Jurassic Park, but the movie doesn't force you to analyze its deeper themes. I would argue that Jaws, the first blockbuster, encourages you to turn on your brain, and that sort of turn on your brain filmmaking is getting more and more popular all the time. Audiences today are down to let Christopher Nolan twist their mind like a balloon animal because there's satisfaction in figuring out what's being said underneath. Plus, with the internet, there are communities to be found, reviews to be read, YouTube videos to be watched, which bring the brain teaser out of the theater. Think about all those videos you've clicked titled, "The Movie Explained." But I think for that reason, brainless blockbusters sometimes get a bad rap. Sure, a Die Hard sequel may not offer much in the way of introspection. People think of it as an action flick, not art. One of my favorites, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, has pretty much no plot, if we're being honest. It's just an excuse to watch beautiful people sing ABBA songs in Greece. And I think that's what makes it so great. I can watch Cher descend some stairs and laugh to myself about how silly it is that she would be Meryl Streep's mother. But it does everything it sets out to do, be a wonderful romp of a time, perfectly. It brings up the question about if all art has to make grand statements. Can popcorn movies still be art? In our series this summer, we'll be exploring this and other aspects of blockbusters and more. Blockbusters are part of our collective experience. For many of us, we may not know a pre-blockbuster world. Even my parents were too young to really remember before Jaws. And yet, the era in many ways lives on today through Marvel movies and more. The industry continues to grow and change, especially as the pandemic has further shifted the way we take in movies. However, I think the excitement of seeing a blockbuster in the theater will be one I cherish throughout the rest of my life. So, what's your favorite blockbuster? What images, actors, directors, feelings come to your mind when you hear that phrase? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like more movie and comedy content, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching and for loving movies. If you like this video, consider subscribing for more introspection on cinema and, whatever other nonsense I get up to. I have a Patreon, which supports me a ton. You can read my patrons' names on screen starting now. When I say that even $1 goes a long way to help the channel, I really and truly mean it. It's hard to tell whenever I'm being genuine, but I'm being genuine. With that Patreon, you get all sorts of cool perks, like access to our Discord, where we'll be discussing all the summer blockbusters that we're covering on the channel this summer, all the ones that are coming out in the theaters, just really diving into what that idea means and, talking about movies in general. That link is in the description. Thank you so much again. Be safe. Watch a movie.